Hello, I'm Professor Christian Holscher, and I want to tell you about some interesting results showing that semaglutide is reducing the risk of developing Alzheimer's in people with diabetes. Glucagon-like peptide, GLP-1, is actually a peptide hormone which is released in the body and does all kinds of things, not just treating diabetes. So semaglutide is a drug that mimics the effect of GLP-1, and it's on the market under the names Ozempic, Wegovy or Rybelsus, and it's very popular and effective in treating diabetes. And studies have shown that it reduces the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Here's such a study, which is basically analyzing large patient databases of people with diabetes and see how they develop. And this is in the US. So they looked at 1.1 million patients. So there are a lot of people that are taking these drugs. So you have a lot of data. And then I looked over a 3-year time period to see how many people are or have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. So they compared semaglutide, which is on the market under the name Ozempic, Wegovy or Rybelsus, with other diabetes drugs that are also on the market. So they looked at first-time diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease and how many people in total were diagnosed in each group that took the different drugs. So here are the results. If you look at the group that took insulin and compare it to semaglutide, then you can see that the number of patients that had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's over 3 years is much higher in the insulin group than in the semaglutide group, which is shown in mint. Metformin is a very popular drug. It's prescribed a lot, mainly because it's cheap and you can take it as a pill, but you can see that it's not as good as reducing the risk of developing Alzheimer's than semaglutide is. Then SGLT2 inhibitors, that's a new class of diabetes drugs. They seem to be better. However, semaglutide still has fewer numbers of people diagnosed with Alzheimer's than these new SGLT2s. Sulfonylureas, that's an old type of drug, and you can see it's not very good in reducing the risk of developing Alzheimer's. The glitazones, again, it's an old group of drugs. They're hardly prescribed anymore. There used to be rosiglitazone, pioglitazone, and you can see that they're not that effective in reducing the risk of developing Alzheimer's. Then the gliptins, again, an older class of drugs, DPP-4 inhibitors, not really very effective in reducing the risk either. And then if you compare semaglutide with all the other GLP-1 type drugs, like Bydureon, that's exenatide, or liraglutide, sold as Victoza, you can see that semaglutide seems to have the edge in reducing the risk even further than the other GLP-1s. So we can take from this that semaglutide appears to be the best drug in this study to reduce the risk, and it was associated with quite a strong reduction of developing Alzheimer's disease, 40 to 70%. Then the other drugs that treat diabetes, they showed some effects as well, but they were just not as effective. There was a follow-up analysis of these data sets by the same group, published this year, And they could show that different types of Alzheimer's disease are affected in different ways by the drug. Like the vascular type of Alzheimer's disease was effectively treated with semaglutide, while other types like frontotemporal dementia or the so-called Lewy body type of dementia wasn't affected as much by the drug. Then here's another study from Taiwan, just to add an Asian patient data analysis to the mix. This is from the Taiwan National Health Databases, and they had 3,121 patients in this analysis. And the time frame was longer than the previous study, 6 years. And they didn't have as many patients, though, so they just bunched up all the GLP-1 type drugs like liraglutide, exenatide, and dulaglutide together into one group. Semaglutide wasn't really available then, and they compared that with all the other diabetes drugs on the market. And here's the main result. You can see that the GLP-1 class drugs reduce the risk of being diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease better than all the other diabetes drugs that are on the market and given to patients. So in conclusion, we can say GLP-1 class drugs are better in reducing the risk for developing dementia. But in this study, the number of patients wasn't high enough to discriminate between different types of drugs. So in conclusion, it seems that semaglutide has some very interesting properties and definitely reduces the risk of developing Alzheimer's over time. But the problem with such large database analyses is that we don't know how big the effect really is, and it might be quite small for the individual. And so proper clinical trials are needed to test the drug in Alzheimer patients. And there are actually currently 2 very large phase 3 trials ongoing, called EVOKE and EVOKE Plus, run by Novo Nordisk. And they are designed to see what is the effect on individual patients. And the patients have Alzheimer's disease. They don't have diabetes, so the effect cannot be just reduced to the improvement of diabetes. It has to be something in addition if there is an effect visible. Then they will run cognitive tests, so a battery of standard tests, and they will analyze beta amyloid in the brain using brain scans, and they take spinal fluid to look at other type of biomarkers, for example, for the chronic inflammation response in the brain. So there will be a lot of data to look at. These are 2 very large clinical trials. They go on for a very long time, 3 years and 4 months. I haven't seen a trial like this before. Each of them have 1,840 patients, and they either get the drug or the placebo. And there are over 300 study centers all over the world where they recruit the patients. So they're in the US, in Canada, and Europe, in China, in India. So we will learn a lot about the effects of semaglutide in these different patient cohorts. So when are we going to see the first results? Actually, the intermediate readout is scheduled to be released in September this year, September 2025. Exciting. And after that, the trial will continue for another year, and the final results will be available at the end of next year. So this could be a really big change. If we see any effects in these trials, then this is big. It's going to change Alzheimer research forever. And these trials are so large that nobody can argue that, oh, well, maybe the result was just a fluke, you don't have enough patients, blah, 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 blah. So this is potentially a revolution. So watch this space for updates. Thank you for watching this little clip. If you're interested in my website, you can have a look at it. There are some updates of latest developments and papers that are of interest. You can look at my own research papers in this area. You can look at ResearchGate, where they're available for free. And yeah, thanks again for watching, and I hope to talk to you soon.